Hello, Murphy Daily here on Written by Murphy, and this video is talking about Pilgrim's Progress. This is part of a series I'm doing, what I call the Immigrant's Guide to American Literature. I just finished rereading Pilgrim's Progress, and I'm so excited to talk about it. It's far denser than I remembered in so many ways that were not visible to me as a kid when I read it. I read it in the single digits. And this is an amazing book as it has to do with the American culture that has been created. So people came to America. When I talk about people coming to America, I know this is a limited way of talking about it, but I'm talking about when the Europeans came to America, the European conquest of America and the creation of American culture, which really flowed out of the European conquest. It is not the only one, but it's the one that I know and the one I was raised with. So that's kind of what I'm talking about now. And one of the stories that pretty much children are taught all over is a story of Plymouth, how the Pilgrims came from Europe, from England to America, and how they started a town, Plymouth Plantation or Plymouth Colony. And that's not the only way that people came to America. People came to America for about three things, and this is pretty true. People came to America for wealth, for money. Columbus certainly came to America for money. They also came to America for adventure. Let's not forget, it's exciting to go somewhere new and see what the world has to offer, right? Go past the edge of what perhaps they thought was the edge of the world. So people came to America for that reason. Before it was even called America, they came there. And especially in the story we tell ourselves, people came to America for freedom, right? For freedom. And one of the things in particular that they wanted of that freedom was religious freedom. And this is part of the story of the Pilgrims coming to America because they were oppressed in their home country and they couldn't worship God the way they wanted to. I think I heard that a million times. And probably a lot of American children heard that a lot too. So this book is not an American book. Pilgrim's Progress was written by John Bunyan in England in, okay, let me look at my notes, 1678. Whether it was written or published then, I don't know, but it was around then, which is after the colony started, after the Plymouth colony started in 1620. So it's kind of contemporary, but really quite a bit later. But it tells so much about that Puritan, which was a very specific set of religious beliefs that really influenced the beginning of America and the beginning of American culture. So this book is so written, I should just tell you about it instead of telling you what I think about it. So the Puritan religion is very particular to England. So the Catholic Church was the church of Europe for hundreds of years, more than 1,000 years, and there came some unrest. Then along came King Henry. So there were Protestants, so that's what that means, protesting against the Catholic Church. We protest, we're going to do it a different way, and there's all kinds of offshoots of that Protestant movement, and the Puritans were part of that. But the Puritans were in England. They were a very English version of Protestantism. And England, well, after King Henry VIII declared that the Catholics were done and he had his own Church of England, that was a big step for Protestantism because they're like, oh, well, okay, now we don't have a Catholic Church anymore. England has its own state church. That's a state church. Well, maybe that's the new way to do things. Big deal. But really, there'd been Protestants for a while, and the Puritans weren't so fond of how the Anglican Church was running things. There was a bit of back and forth. It wasn't just a slam dunk, no more Catholics in England anymore. But that's outside of the scope of this discussion. The Puritans thought this Anglican Church is still too Catholic. There was a lot, the Puritans had a huge rejection, like huge rejection of the Catholic Church. Let me make sure I am talking about this. Okay, so they wanted their religion, and they wanted their religion to be the only religion. They didn't want other religions. Other religions were wrong in their mind. So when we talk about religious freedom, at this particular point, this very early point in European American history, religious freedom meant free to think like me. Everyone's free to think like me. So there's a ways to go. There was, let's see. Let's go back to this particular book. In this book is written in a strange kind of, some people say it's the very first novel. It's an interesting literary piece of work because it starts out with the author talking about, well, I was having trouble, and literally he did write it while he was in prison for preaching in an unapproved way. Once again, the Anglican Church did not approve of the Puritans, and the Puritans did not approve of the Anglican Church. Thank you very much. So he was preaching, and they threw him in prison for that. So he was in prison and not repenting. And so he's writing a book of himself in prison. And in the story, he talks about, I was in prison and I was thinking, and then I fell asleep and I had a dream. So he had a dream. So here's this meta story. It's a dream sequence, right? And he has the dream, and in the story, there's action, but when dialogue happens, it happens like a play. So the main character in the play is called Christian. And at first he is kind of a regular guy, and later he becomes Christian. And so the dialogue happens like Christian, and he will encounter, he encounters somebody that gives him the good news, evangelist. So that person is named Evangelist. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, this is like a play. Oh, I've seen this before. This is a morality play. And a morality play is Catholic. There's a famous morality play called Everyman. And it's where there's like Everyman, and that's his literal name in the play. Everyman goes about his business and encounters different things, and the characters are given names of what they are supposed to represent. So this is very similar to how that works in this Catholic world. There's a morality play, and these type of dialogues are used. So he is calling upon a rather well-known literary form. But and it's a literary form that was familiar as a Catholic form, but he's reclaiming it as a Puritan form. One of the other things that struck me as he goes about throughout his adventures, Christian's adventures, is the people are named things like, oh, his buddy, faithful. Christian finds a person faithful along the path, and they are friends. And then later he has another companion, hopeful. I'm like, wait a minute. This is ringing a bell for me too. I remember the Puritans' naming conventions. So let's talk a little bit about one of the things that Puritans were famous for. They were famous for naming their kids weird stuff. They named their kids things like Constance and Prudence and humility. They also named them phrases like, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. A full-on sentence is the name of your kid. Like, what? But I'd like to say the Puritans were counterculture in their time. They were saying, we're not going to be Catholic. Catholics are used to naming their kids after saints. Well, we don't believe in saints. We don't believe in Catholic. That's Catholic, and that's horrible, and we won't do that anymore. So we're going to go all the way in a different direction. and name our kids what we think we want to name our kids. So these were super counterculture, making a statement, very to the point of naming their children. And so this is famous. They would name their children an entirely new invented way of naming things so that they were rebelling against what had come before. So this is kind of what's happening in this play, hopeful and Christian. And the bad guys have horrible names too, like vainglory and despair, things like that. So it's hearkening back to the morality plays that were happening in the Catholic times, and we're continuing to be reformed in Protestant Puritan Reformation times. But it's also showing something that Puritans did. They took on this renaming, reforming of society. Also, the Catholic Church had a huge effect on European history, this huge effect. So many things that came out of previous art, previous literature prior to 1678, which is when Pilgrim's Progress was created, was straight up Catholic. One of the most still gorgeous Catholic pieces of literature is Dante's Divine Comedy. And this reminds me a bit of the Divine Comedy because it's like this journey. Christian is going through this journey and he's encountering different scenes. And I'm like, oh, this is like the Divine Comedy. It's not nearly as glorious as the Divine Comedy, but with this same counterculture creation of art that the Puritans are trying to create, toss off everything that was Catholic, because Catholic is so bad, it's evil, it's demonic as far as they were concerned. We are creating our own new story. So these were some of the things I was thinking about as I was reading. It became clear to me as I was reading Pilgrim's Progress. So there's more. Inside the book, this is a period in history, this particular moment in history. They've got the printing press and they are using it. Back in the early 1600s, we got the King James Authorized Version. We got an English Bible, baby. And so they had an English Bible and they were like, we know what's in here now. It's the book. It's written right here. And that is part of what allowed the Puritans to take a look at what the church was. They were like, we've got it now. We know. We can figure it out all by ourselves. We don't need a church to tell us. We can read it ourselves. So they had the book. And Pilgrim's Progress starts with the book. But let's also talk about history. This was a period in time that lasted quite a bit longer. I would say the next 150 years to the beginning of the American Revolution, where people called it the Age of Reason, where this idea of figuring it out for yourself, engaging with it, thinking it through, was really important. So what also in Pilgrim's Progress we see quite a bit of is Christian and his companions working out the proper way and working out their opinions and their judgment of the people around them. And what they're doing is they're working out, talking it out together. Well, what do you think of this? And what do you think of this? And what is your opinion of this? And what is the right way? And this is a type of Socratic method. This is them using reason, sharp and clean. We are working it out. So when these pilgrims together take what they know, thank you very much, from their book and their reason. They look all around them at the people around them and they judge them. They're like, I know the right answer and you are wrong. So they're very happy to go about judging the people that they meet. And this is what we are supposed to do. This is what the Puritans are telling us. You should do this. You must judge for yourself and you must cling to what is right, which also means soundly rejecting anybody that's wrong. And as I read this book, I see so much harsh judgment. I looked and I waited all the way till the very end of the book, close to the end, before we found the word mercy. Mercy came once when Hopeful was describing his conversion. He found the mercy seat of Jesus Christ. Mercy was not supposed to be part of the pilgrim's life. That was something God gave, not what we as people gave. So this is very interesting that the Puritans have a strong judge what is right, use your reason, and shove off what is not right. Let's see. I made some notes because I knew I was going to be excited about all this. It is not subtle, their Pilgrim's Progress's rejection of the church, the Catholic Church. There is one part where he's talking about a diversion off the straight and narrow path, which is the correct path as they have been instructed. One of the ways is to the Pope. And Pope is this evil monster that will grab you and grind you up and kill you. Whoa. One thing they don't mention at all, ever, is the church. So in the life of this Puritan book, the church doesn't have a place. What I know from the history of the Puritans and the Pilgrims, they thought a lot about the meeting house. They would go to the church and everybody went to church and Sabbath was a big deal. But the church did not have the high place that a minister or a preacher would say. A priest is not the authority that in the Catholic Church this priest held a special place that gave to the people. The people could find out for themselves. They would reason for themselves. They would discuss amongst themselves. So the Catholic Church was very rejected. One of the other things that I found interesting in Pilgrim's Progress, in the Catholic Church there are a host of saints and angels that are meant to assist Christians along the way. These are inspiring stories, inspiration, and people are encouraged to pray to different saints or angels. No such thing in this Puritan book. We do have one story where Christian is walking through, he meets a castle. He meets some people at a castle and they show him images, and this is kind of where it repeats the Divine Comedy. They show him images that are meant to inspire him and help him understand the world. And they show him an image of Jesus Christ helping him, and Jesus has an individual interest in this individual Christian. So Jesus becomes, in this story, far more omnipresent, that Jesus is helping each individual Christian. So in order to have that kind of individual relationship with Jesus rather than a relationship with a host of saints, Jesus has to take on a far more omnipresent status. So there are no saints whatsoever. There's just people talking with people. Let's see, what else? It did make me sad that love was not interesting to these people, that they were very, very keenly aware of, they would describe their own sin, and that they wanted mercy and forgiveness from God. But they didn't talk about, they talked about the joy of what was to come, the beauty of the celestial city, which was their heaven. And they were extremely judgmental of anybody that didn't have exactly their way of understanding. So the Puritans were working out in their community a different way of being. They were reconstructing what had been given. This Bible that they believed in, this book that was helping them. They were totally rejecting what had come before. So they were counterculture rebels, but extremely conformist to their own group. So I think about, they were full of logic and reason, full of very individual, the sense of the individual has to work it out for themselves. This is before we got to the West and the cowboys. This is the individual. Like, wow, this is a real basis that I see in America now, the sense of the individual and the sense of, I know what is right because I figured it out. And this very old history of judgment and counterculture all the way back. And what we find in Plymouth is these seminal roots of much of American culture. That's what Pilgrim's Progress reminded me of, and I was so amazed to find absolutely just straight down the line roots of many American culture themes. We are the products of where we come from. And there are a lot of things that are still part of, that harken back to. There are parts of Pilgrim's Progress. You know, Pilgrim's Progress, even now, they say it's still extremely popular. It's one of the biggest, most popular Christian books even now. There are movies made about it and cartoons made about it. It's a really relevant document, and it's worth it. I believe that it's a critical, fundamental book to start understanding the American people. So that's about it. I'd love to hear what you think about it. We can continue the conversation.